Hello everyone. In week 5, we are going to be looking at the assessment data that I have generated for you from your rubric assignment, and we're going to be making sense of assessment data at 2 different levels. So we are first going to look at Susky's chapter on assessing student learning, and we're going to talk about assessment data at the course and program type level. And then we're also going to talk about a more global level of assessment. So I'm going to summarize some of these aspects of Susky's chapter because it was not one I was able to provide to you. So for those of you that do not have the book, I'm going to go over the main points of this chapter. So there's more than simple data analysis or running the numbers, if you will. So the first part is summarizing. We're going to look at what data do I have, what types of information can I get from that data. We're then going to talk about evaluating the measures that you used. So how do I make sure that the measures I'm using are the correct ones to answer the questions or to really get at those learning outcomes. You then want to do some analysis. And this goes beyond just what the actual numbers are telling you and encourages you to ask questions about your data. And then finally, we'll talk about maintenance, the refinement of measures, and also your procedures for keeping your data. So you likely have had this in your research courses, or if you have not, you will. But we are mostly going to be talking about quantitative data this week. But there is also qualitative data, and I'll give you some examples from our class. So under quantitative data, we have the 4 different types of quantitative data: nominal, ordinal, interval, and ratio. And again, you can learn more about these types either in your research courses or you might recall it yourself. But the quantitative data you'll be looking at this week on your rubrics will be ratio, and that is because it is possible for a student to earn a 0 on the assignments you gave them, and so you'll be ending up with a percentage essentially. Think for qualitative data things like focus groups, and for the purpose of our course, our discussion forums. So one easy way to turn qualitative data into a quantitative assessment is by creating the rubric. So you are grading papers, you can use a rubric. You're grading discussions, you can use a rubric. And you can easily turn that into quantitative data. However, it then loses some of the nuances. So it may also be good to have multiple measures. And pardon me, I am losing my voice, so I'll try my best to keep this short. So there are ways to summarize. You will likely only use the first 2 when you're doing your assignment this week. You will be looking at tallies, so that's an actual count of something. How many students, for example, scored above a 50%? If you have a certain metric, you want everyone to get an A. How many students did fall in that A range, B range, etc.? Percentages are also fairly obvious. You might want to look at a larger number of students. You might want to compare across different classes. And you would use percentages to look at assessments with multiple measures as well. Aggregates means that you might be using multiple measures, or you might want to take, for example, we have at Widener a writing sample for our undergraduate population. So writing samples are supposed to be taken at the beginning, the middle, and then the end of their undergraduate career. And so we would look at the aggregate scores for those writing samples to look at how people have either improved, hopefully, or stayed stagnant or declined over time. Averages you might use as well if you are looking for example, your final grade in the course would be an average. There might be different weighting that you have for that. And then also qualitative summaries are ways of summarizing your data. Under the evaluate section, these are all taken directly from Susky's chapter. So she says there are certain questions to ask about your measures. So how well does your sample represent all students? If you're looking at only an intro psych class and looking at their writing samples, is that representative of all Widener undergraduate students? Likely not. You also want to know how precise are the results. So if you're using percentages, for example, and you have a sample of students, you would want to consider what the error margin would be if you expanded that sample to include all students. So say you have a group of people who average out to have a 90% on an exam. That doesn't necessarily mean that the entire student body would perform at a 90% average. You also want to consider how difficult individual assessment items are, or in cases of more qualitative assessments, how complex are your instructions, and how well does each test item discriminate between low and high scorers. So the idea is you want people who typically score high to score high on your assessments, and those that score low will typically fall in the low range. If you're seeing everyone coming in very low, then that might be a signal that your item is, or the particular assessment you're using is not ideal. And then finally, do other assessments. If you're using multiple measures, is that corroborating the findings from that one measure? And then the final question is, do results fall in appropriate patterns? So in most cases, an exam or even scores on a writing assignment would fall on the bell curve, where most people are getting an average score, and there are some high achievers and then some who are scoring fairly low. I wanted to share this quote directly from the text from Susky. So when we're talking about multiple assessments, it says, while many assessments are conducted simply to describe student learning, summarizing results, for example, others are intended to explain, predict, or explore. So think about your higher level questions. The writing sample question is not how well do students perform when given a writing prompt. It's how do students improve over time in their writing skills when they're at Widener. This one I like here, what kinds of students are most likely to drop out? So when you're tracking course data, for example, if you're seeing someone decline in their discussion scores, that's a sign that they might be losing interest, or that they might have something coming up in their lives. So using assessment results to answer those types of questions can really take your data to another level and can be more interesting. And then finally, the idea of maintenance is that there should be a system for performing all of these things. So summarizing, evaluating, and analyzing. You should also have multiple storage solutions. At the institutional level, we keep assessment data, and that is typically done by an office, but it should also be done at an individual level. So you might be keeping raw data from the courses you teach in the future, if that is what you choose to do. Or you might be keeping raw data from assessments you're doing for programs you are overseeing. And you might also need to keep examples of that work. I wrote student work here, but you might want to keep, if say you do a focus group with faculty members, you might want to keep some examples of that just for your own records as well. So the final thing I want to talk to you about today is educational data mining, and I did put 2 articles in the module this week. This is a relatively new field, but as we think about big data and what kind of tools we have access to now, it will change the way that institutions report and collect data, or how they consume it as well. And a couple examples, you may have heard of these 2 tools, Burning Glass and EMSI. They are both data mining tools that actually scrape the internet for information, and we currently use them for recruitment purposes and for new program development. So interested in your thoughts on EDM in general, and I look forward to seeing your analysis of your results this week.